Right, it seems we're now live on air. Whether I believe it or not is another matter. I've never done this before, so if technical difficulties cause all sorts of problems, I apologise in advance. Expect this to be an absolute mess.
Foster club.
Now, earlier on, I contacted Matthew Hunt with a suggestion that we do a little hangout on the science of the biblical flood. Because when we are getting into discussions with creationists, we mainly concentrate on the creation itself. But most of the literal creationists also accept this literal account of the flood. So I thought, well, let's have a look at the science of it in the manner of Terry Pratchett and the science of this world. And I sent Matthew a message, and I asked him to do a calculation for me. To do with
I hasten to add, I've just been.
It's a nightmare calculation. But I thought we could break it into a couple of, maybe a few topics. And the first topic, which, as you can tell from my smile, I like, is where did the water come from and where did it go? Now, I did a calculation, 2012, I think it was, way back. I had to hunt through a forum to actually find it. And I calculated that to flood the entire Earth to the depth of half of the height of Mount Everest, so we're not even talking about the full height of Mount Everest, just half of the height, it would take, now where's my number, 2,046 million cubic kilometres of water.
Wow.
That is a larger volume than the crust of the Earth.
I did this calculation back in 2010, and I got 1.4 trillion cubic kilometers. It's just three times the volume of water that's on the Earth. But anyway.
Now, I would like to give the creationist general response to this, because they don't think that they filled it to the top of the mountains or half the Himalayan mountains or whatever. It's what was the height of the Himalayan mountains? If anybody could tell me offhand.
About 28,000 feet to the top.
8 kilometers.
Yes, 8 kilometers. I've calculated it just to the depth of 4 kilometers.
Well, creationists are going to reply and say that the Himalayas it wasn't that high up. They're just saying at a certain point they filled it up, and then the mountains continue to grow over it.
Right. That's the. And if we're talking about young Earth creationism here, which I presume. I mean, I don't know. Nate, I don't think is a young Earth creationist. Are there other Christians in the room?
Me.
Fiona? Okay. But Nate, I think, is not a young Earth creationist, so he might have a very different take on this. But the young Earth creationists generally do make the argument that Chef was just talking about. They say that in fact the mountains were much lower at the time, and we're talking 4,500 years ago, and then they very quickly rose up after the flood. It was one of the geological after effects of the flood. Of course, that's a pretty absurd position, but that is their position.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I only use the half of the height of Mount Everest. But in discussion with a floodist, they were talking about that there were only gentle hills, and I asked, well, how high did the land protrude out of the water? And they wouldn't even verify that it was an inch out of the water. Now, somebody else did a calculation on the smoothness of the Earth as it currently is, and they compared it to a scaled up snooker ball. And the Earth turns out to be, the way it is, smoother than a scaled up snooker ball. Now that's with the Himalayas present.
Okay, maybe I'm too American, but what's a snooker ball?
A billiard ball. Billiard ball.
Slightly smaller than an American pool ball.
I don't understand what that means. Smoother than it's clearly the surface of the Earth is not smooth. So what does that mean?
What it means is if you scale up a snooker ball to the size of the Earth, and most things don't come smoother than a snooker ball or a pool ball, if you scale up to the size of the Earth, it ends up with a rougher surface than the Earth has.
Okay, I don't understand why that's at all relevant to the conversation.
Because it means that, I mean, even with the Himalayas, the Earth is pretty smooth as it is.
I know what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah. And given that if you had all that tectonic activity during the flood would have been the least of Noah's worries.
Well, this is true of almost everything, and I think the question of where the water came from is not nearly as interesting as the question of where's the evidence, and why does the evidence that we have from geology so clearly contradict this idea of a global flood a few thousand years ago?
The interesting thing about where did the water come from is that they will claim it came from the fountains of the deep.
Yes.
Now, your problem with that is, where are these fountains of the deep? They tell you it's between the crust and the mantle. Now, the mantle temperature ranges from 500 to 900 degrees centigrade. So if you go with the lower temperature. So all this water is sitting at 500 degrees. Now, as far as I'm aware, even at that depth, it would be steam there already. I think water can only stay liquid. Something, was it 250 odd?
Yeah, 215, 220, something like that.
Yeah, no matter what the pressure is, after that it will be steam. But let's just say, okay, it was liquid there. Give them that. When those fountains of the deep opened up, you have got over 2 million cubic kilometres, given that the pressure has been just released, of superheated steam belching into the atmosphere. And remember that when water turns to steam, the volume of steam it produces is 1,600 times the volume of the water that generated it. So that would be your 2,000 million cubic kilometres times 1,600. And that's the volume of superheated steam that would be belching into the atmosphere. That heat, is that not going to parboil Noah at that volume?
Heat
this
is
why
actually
I've asked you to do a calculation on that. What temperature would the atmosphere be?
Fish sticks.
The problem of heat is the single biggest problem here with this global flood model, not just from the beginning of it, but take the geological record and the young Earth geologists. You take all of the strata that they claim were laid down during or after the flood as a result of the flood, and you take all of the events that we see and the phenomena that we see within those geological strata, and compress that into only a few years as opposed to billions of years. And the heat released by those processes is enough to literally boil off the atmosphere and probably enough to leave the Earth still molten from the tectonic activities, from the meteor impacts that we see, from the volcanic eruptions that we see within those strata. Those things happened over a course of hundreds of millions, billions of years. If you try to compress them into just a few years, the amount of heat released in such a short period of time would literally have melted the Earth. We would not be here.
And the other question is,
momentarily return to the scripture about the whole flood, the height of the mountains, just for a moment. In Genesis 8 and verse 5, it says, "And the waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible." So Mount Ararat is about 16,000 feet. 16,000 feet high, 16,000 feet high. Now that means that if they're just seeing the flood, right? And so that's 10 months after the flood. So if creationists are going to try to argue that the mountains were just slowly starting to build at that point, that means at that 10 months in, they were still 16,000 feet high unless there was some super acceleration of the mountain being formed, which, by the way, Mount Ararat is a volcano.
Yes.
So surely, if they're on top of that mountain, they would be screwed. So.
Yes.
Well,
Not
if it
only
were
that,
active.
it does say
But if it was
the flood-
forming, then it had to have been active.
Yeah, it does say that the flood continued to rise until it covered the highest mountains. So there were mountains before the flood.
Yes, there had to be.
There had to be for that. So the answer that I got from the chap that I spoke to, who wouldn't even acknowledge that the land had to be at least an inch above sea level, was completely missing that part, that the floodwaters rose until it covered the highest mountains. So definite mountains.
I did a quick calculation of how fast the flood waters would rise. You interested in having a
Yes.
my calculations?
Yeah.
Okay, let's open them up. Was it? It was no.
While we wait on him to do math, I have to just say I just caught on to Paul Hartley's logo. I just figured out why I recognize that. Didn't catch the Ghostbusters reference till just now.
Yeah, and while Matthew is looking that up, I'll just say the other thing is, if all of this water, that vast 2,000 million cubic kilometres of water, came belching out of these fountains of the deep, what replaced the water?
Well, there is also the vapor canopy theory that Whitcomb and Morris, who kind of launched the modern creationist movement, that was their theory, along with Paul Brown. That there was this huge canopy of vapor hanging over the Earth, and it released. There's all kinds of reasons why that's absolute nonsense, of course.
Well, to answer Fiona about the what replaced the water, is that might explain why the British roads have got so many potholes in them.
You see, that's the problem, because if you imagine a spherical cavity within the crust full of water, and the water comes out of it and the cavity collapses, you're still left with the same volume.
Well, I've heard this one that the seas were shallower then, and the water came, because the water dropped from underneath the Atlantic. What actually happened is the water came out and the Atlantic dropped, and then all the water went into the Atlantic as it drained off the land. But of course that presumes that the entire depth of the Atlantic remained completely empty for a year. Until it collapsed and all the water fell into it.
Yeah.
Or all that water emptied out Middle Earth, and that's where the hobbits went to live.
They all drowned.
Okay, so my little calculation.
Yeah.
My little calculation. First of all, I calculated the volume of water, assuming that the radius of the Earth was about 6 million kilometers, and the height of Everest is around 9,000 or 9 kilometers.
Right.
Then I computed the volume of water to cover Mount Everest to get it to becoming about 4 times 10 to the 18 meter cubes. Then I said, well, all this water had to come in 40 days and 40 nights. That's 40 24-hour days. So I calculated the volume rate to be 1.3 times 10 to the 12 meter cubes per second.
And the same thing is true of the sediments being laid down.
Okay, now
The rate at which they had to be deposited.
Not finished yet.
Yeah, okay.
Hang on. On you go, Matt.
So the water level increase would be that volume rate divided by the surface area of the Earth. And I got that to be 0.0025 meters per second. So that would mean the water level rises every 2.5 millimeters each second. So it would take around 12 minutes for a 6-foot man to be completely covered by the rain.
Yeah.
See, when you start to put it into those terms, it becomes so
ludicrous.
The numbers become so vast. The rate at which the flood had to occur becomes so fast.
What about the weight of water hitting the upper timbers of the ark in a time period? What about?
Well, hey, if I can, I'm going to have to run to the store real quick, but if I can say my little piece, I guess we need to consider, everything we're talking about, and I think, it's a fair statement to say there's a whole lot of variables that we may never even know to consider.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
So among those, I would simply point out, either way, I don't have a huge problem. I totally understand the natural world, our explanation. It is how this conversation's gone. But truly, if there's this one entity responsible for everything, then it becomes, if you believe that, it becomes much less difficult to believe that regardless of subject matter, is there the supernatural stuff that can interact with us? Well, is there the supernatural stuff that can take place in this natural world and supersede some laws or whatever we think should happen?
Sure.
And I think that can't be ruled out, especially when the whole initial claim is there's a deity responsible for everything in existence. Then these questions become a lot more, okay, well, we don't have evidence or sufficient data to back that up, but we definitely need to consider that.
Well, what I would say to that is the following. If you're going to say, ignore the science and say God did it, then don't use science to try and prove that it happened.
Exactly.
What was the last part?
I would say two things in response to that. One is that the problem isn't just the question of feasibility. The problem is the question of why does the evidence say the opposite?
Yes.
So it isn't just that God would have had to sort of miracle this much water into existence. He also had to miracle all the evidence it would have left away and left all of this evidence behind that very clearly disproves the idea that there was ever a global flood that killed off everything on Earth except the inhabitants of this one boat. And the second problem is this. Hold on, let me just get the second. The second problem is this. Once you've invoked miracles, you could use that to defend any claim whatsoever in the history of the Earth. There is no way, once you start to inject supernatural claims into it, that you can ever rule out anything. You no longer have the ability to discern between true claims and false claims.
Exactly. I keep saying that once you include that stuff and God stuff, then all logic goes out of the window.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
That's not to insult you, Nate. But what we're saying is that...
Well, it's not my point.
No. What I'm saying is that the problem is that certain floodists will attempt to invoke science to explain the flood, but they reject all of the science that shows that there are real problems with it. Now, they can't have their cake and eat it. They either have to claim a miracle which is able to break the laws of the basic laws of physics or of science, in which case, why are they using science to prove the flood? I have no problem if they say this is an article of faith. My difficulty comes when they attempt to use science to prove the flood.
Yeah, I understand and I agree.
But Nick's responsible for his position, not the position of other people. So.
What science has been used to prove the flood?
Well, faux science. But what I would say is, yeah. So consider that ultimately, that if you believe in this God that can do supernatural stuff, well, yeah, you can use that for anything else, but it doesn't make it invalid. Is it true or is it not? maybe we don't know yet. Maybe in 100 years we'll have an answer. But the other thing I'd say to Ed real quick, then I really do have to leave, is, you know, before we start saying, well, the devil did it and God tricked us to test our faith, that's stupid. I just think as humans, there's a whole lot of stuff we can admit, you know, even science, like gravity. They'll be like, well, we're 99% certain if you drop a pencil, it's going to fall down every time, or towards the center of the planet every time. But I don't think, you know, there's still things they'll say, there are variables that we potentially don't know. So rather than saying the devil did it or God tricked us, you know, maybe there's just information we're lacking, and 100 years from now we'll be like, oh yeah, there was no devil, there was no God planning evidence, we just totally overlooked this thing that we never saw coming. So I think a healthy dose of skepticism or withholding judgment, instead of being like, I'm so certain that you are an idiot, you're like, look, I really think this is the best natural explanation we currently have, that's why we're going with it. You know, in the interest of never saying never, never say never. But hey, thanks for having me. I do have to run. I hope to catch you guys after a while.
Yeah.
Take care, Nate.
Bye-bye, Nate. Can I just go back to the volume of water? I asked a quick question, but I think somebody was already talking. Because Mark, in the actual YouTube comments, has mentioned about the onslaught of water. And like I said, about what the ark could withstand in terms of the sheer volume falling on it.
Well, Wayne, I'm glad you asked that question, because I've done a calculation. Okay, so I calculated the pressure increase on the general on a general thing to be around 25 pascals per second.
You're basically talking something like 3/4 of a ton of water per minute dropping on every single square meter of the Earth.
It'd be like matchwood, wouldn't it?
But talking of pressure, pressure is a big point because, what is it, 1.4 trillion cubic kilometers of water has a weight. And that weight is...
It's pretty high, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's something in the region of like 1.4... about 2... I'm working out the full volume. The vapor canopy, it works out at something in the region of about 1.4 quadrillion tons. And that happens to be sitting on top of the atmosphere if we're talking about a vapor canopy. Now,
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure people like to think of that, the idea about like spaceships just floating around in space in low orbit, but actually what they're doing is they're simply following a ballistic trajectory in the fact that you fire something fast enough, it will actually miss the Earth. And not come back down. It's only when it slows down that it actually hits the Earth again. If you want it to go faster, it'll completely miss the Earth and hit the Moon or something like that. But the thing is that things in orbit are moving, and a vapor canopy would have to be traveling around at least 1,000 miles an hour around the outside of the Earth to stay up there. And obviously, it isn't if it's a solid structure, in which case it would have to rest on the atmosphere, which when you actually work it all out, it's something like 110,000 atmospheres at sea level, which would actually liquefy the atmosphere. To be able to...
how's the sun going to get through?
Well, it doesn't.
That's another big problem. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of problems with this. Yeah. Who's here is familiar with the Paluxy man prints?
Yeah.
Is everybody familiar with that?
Yeah.
So down in Glen Rose, Texas, there's the Paluxy River, and in this the riverbed back probably a century ago, they found these footprints of dinosaurs and footprints that kind of look like human footprints. Turns out they're not. Yeah. So, but somewhere along the line, it was actually debunked by a couple of creationists who said, "Wait a minute, the plateau on which these prints are found sits on top of almost a mile of sediments that the young Earth global flood model says were deposited by the flood. Which means that these dinosaurs and people would have had to tread water for a year while feeding on something, as a mile of sediments were deposited below them at a rate of a few feet per hour.
Yes.
So that they could then walk around in the soft sediments once the water is receded to leave the prints behind. Yeah. It's a bigger problem for the young Earth global flood model than it is for science.
The other problem that I think we have is that within the layers, not on top, but within the layers, you can find layers that have fossilized raindrops, fossilized insect tracks.
Right.
How on
and much
earth,
bigger animals too.
How could they be preserved during this huge flood? Now this is where our fluid dynamics person comes in, Mr. Matt Hunt. With that amount of water barreling across a soft sediment of some sort that a little spider's walked across, what are the chances of those things remaining in place?
Well, it isn't just bugs. Yeah, it isn't just bugs. I mean, we find
the probability of the footprints remaining in the mud is minimal.
Exactly. Anybody who goes outside when your ground is dry as dust and the thunderstorm comes over, you see the raindrops hit the dust and you get little imprints of raindrops, okay? But then as the storm continues and the deluge starts, you lose all those imprints just in the smallest of puddles.
Right.
So a global flood leaves the imprint of a raindrop. How?
Can I just bring in some post-flood problems here? I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet, but
no, we've still got to get to post-flood. We're sort of dealing with the flood itself first.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, come on. Sorry, I just came in.
Another thing which I think is a problem for the flood, at least the fluid dynamics of the flood, is I think at one point the water has to go supersonic.
Super liquid.
How do you mean, Matt?
Meaning the water has to go faster than the speed of sound.
No, I know what supersonic means. I mean, under what circumstances?
Well, in order to actually, this is some of the stuff I've read about the perhaps the water or jets from the Earth apparently have to be supersonic, according to some of the creationist material I've read.
Yeah, Baumgartner's hydroplate theory, where it shoots up into the atmosphere and then comes back down as rain. That
Possibly,
the pressure would have forced it supersonic. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a jet going at supersonic speed, you're basically going to vaporize that very quickly because the water will want to spread out, and you've almost got like a flat plate, so the water will just spray up very, very quickly. And even if it's, I don't think there's a mathematical theory of supersonic hydrodynamics. It's that insane that people haven't even written down some equations for it because it's a part of.
More importantly,
do they think the water just ejaculated into the sky?
I think it's called the lunar Bukake theory.
Yeah. More importantly, if your water is coming out of the ground under such pressure that it is actually going supersonic, at the point that it reaches the atmosphere and it is actually able to expand, and like you say, vaporize, it will do what all fluids do when they hit a large expanse and they're able to suddenly vaporize. It'll sublime. It'll turn into ice straight away. You will suck that much energy out of the atmosphere in order to be able to vaporize, and that you would just suck all the heat out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
There's
what about, have you guys ever heard of the Hovind comet theory?
Yes.
where he proposed that a comet full of water would have caused the flood.
Right.
And you have the problem of this heat from the gravitational potential energy. The water would be steam by the time it reached the surface of the Earth. So.
Yeah. They sent him to jail for saying something that stupid. So.
And aqua.
Did he
aqua.
also come up with a problem to? Did he suggest that it decelerated at the edge of the Earth's atmosphere and then just waited while it politely melted?
God could do anything.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. I've got a nice little picture somewhere around here of all the water on Earth in a ball next to the Earth. Mm-hmm. And what we're looking for is a ball that is, in effect, 4 times the size of this, right? So, what is it? I think it's something like that, right? Can you see the picture? Oh, hang on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're looking at a comet that is 4 times the size of that. So it's something about the size of the fucking moon.
Paul, for an awful minute there, I thought you were holding up Wasp on the moon.
I want to go back to what Fiona was talking about with the insect tracks. That's just the beginning of it.
Ooh,
when you look at the strata that were supposedly laid down by the flood or immediately after the flood as a result of the flood, you find all kinds of evidence in there that could not have of events that could not have taken place underwater. That you find meteor impact craters. You find all kinds of sub-aerial, like desert sandstones, for example, in the Grand Canyon. You find burrows. You find nesting sites. I mean, right in the middle of these strata that were supposedly laid down by the flood, you've got dinosaur nesting sites that were there. Like somehow they managed to build nests and keep them and mate and feed and all that while this raging flood, while they're treading water. There's so much that just, like I said, it's not a matter of how is it feasible. It's a matter of God apparently must have miracled away all the evidence and miracled in all of the evidence that clearly disproves this idea. These things could not have happened.
On top of that, you've also got to consider that certain civilizations must have been very good at underwater basket weaving, and underwater pottery firing.
Right. Yeah, because completely missed it.
Why did God forget to tell Moses to take 2 of every flowering plant with him on the ark? Because flowering plants weren't going to survive a flood either.
So I think that we basically worked out so far that there is no way to find that amount of water in that amount of time.
Right.
It's now ending up with ark soup.
And incidentally, if you did just the vapor canopy thing, if you did have a vapor canopy that held just half of that water, and it was sat above the Earth's atmosphere, in order to have that much atmosphere, for it to be a vapor, for it to be a vapor and not just ice or water, just liquid water, but to be a vapor, then the cloud would be larger than the planet Neptune.
Yeah. So I mean, there are real problems with that one, and then we get to the question of where did the water go? Now, one thought we have this this idea that the sorry, it's my husband destroying my kitchen.
It happens.
There he is.
Well, before you go on, Fiona, I don't want to preempt you, but the creationists love fucking Grand Canyon. The floodists, they love it. And
even though the Grand Canyon totally disproves the idea of a flood.
Yeah,
there's no possible way.
Because they like to say that the canyon through it was caused by the flood. You're still left with the problem of what built up the sediment layers in the first place.
The flood.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what they claim. That all of those sediments were laid down by the flood, and then this earth dam broke through, and all of this water that had been trapped carved out this channel through the flood through those soft sediments very quickly.
Well, that's a new one on me. That.
Patently ridiculous. No, that's been their theory forever.
Yeah.
It's patently ridiculous, but
your problem there is, well, where's it draining to?
See, this is the thing.
Channels. Because there's nowhere for it to go.
Well, no, but see, they proposed that there was a much flatter Earth, and then during the flood, the mountains were pushed up, and the ocean basins were lowered, so all the water ended up in the ocean basins, and that's why all the sediment is there. But then you have all the sediment that was needed to form the Grand Canyon, to form all the mountains.
And let me just point out very quickly why the Grand Canyon part couldn't possibly be true. Because when you look at the different sediment layers of the Grand Canyon, you've got sandstone, you've got mudstone, you've got limestone, you've got shale, in interspersed layers of different kinds. Every single one of those layers requires a completely different depositional environment. Some of them can only happen when it's not underwater. Like, for example, the Coconino Sandstone is a desert sandstone formation. You can't form a desert in the middle of a flood. It's not possible. So, and by the way, none of those layers can be laid down during a raging flood. None of them. I mean, limestone requires tranquil, shallow marine environments. That's not going to happen when you're depositing sediment at massive, incredible rates. So, the Grand Canyon by itself completely disproves the idea that.
And better still.
And not only that. Oh, I'll let you ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, better still, that area is actually volcanic. Because of the uplift, there is volcanoes in that around the Grand Canyon, and there are occasions where there are actually basalt flows into the Grand Canyon, in between the layers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just say that there's an even larger problem in the actual shape of the Grand Canyon.
Dang it, Matt, that's where I'm trying to go. You took it from me.
The Grand
Hydrodynamics, here we go.
The meanders.
Typically is a meandering river formation. That's quite clear from rivers we've seen form here, there, and everywhere, all over Earth. However, if the speed of the water is as fast as we think, then the Grand Canyon would be a straight fucking line.
Right. Right. It wouldn't meander like that.
No. I mean, at one point it turns back on itself 180 degrees.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be like a massive delta?
That's the floodwater swirling, though. That's the. Have you ever seen floodwater? It's all swirling, right? It's swirling.
Here's one of the arguments that they make. This comes from Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin, not the wrestler, but not the wrestler. He's an actual geologist with these creation research.
So this is
his argument.
The Stone Cold Stunner argument. Go ahead.
Right. It would be stunning if this were anything but bullshit. But he argues that the Mount St. Helens eruption, it proves that the Grand Canyon was dug out very quickly, because after the Mount St. Helens eruption, there was a thing formed called Engineers Canyon, and it happened essentially the way they proposed the Grand Canyon was dug out. There was an earth dam that was built up from the sediments, and a lake built up behind it, and then the earth dam broke through, and the waters came rushing through and formed this thing called Engineers Canyon. And you can see layers in Engineers Canyon, and so they say, wow, there's layers there. There's layers in the Grand Canyon. See, this proves that it happened that way. Except that the layers in the Engineers Canyon are all of a single, what geologists call lithology. They're volcanic mud and ash.
Yeah.
They're not shale and limestone and mudstone and sandstone. They're all a single lithology. That's exactly what we would expect to see in a situation like that.
The person who refuted
the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, the person who refuted this, by the way, was the Ultimate Warrior. So.
Right.
Now, one of the things I was going to say was some of the people who talk about this canopy, they have it as a canopy of ice, okay? And they propose Yeah, the flood waters returned to this solid canopy of ice. Because you see, it says in the Bible that the windows of the heavens were opened to allow the rain in to cause the flood. So you need windows to get the water through. So something as small as a water molecule couldn't get through this. They had to open the windows. Now, if it all went, that means that the windows were shut and all the water was in there, and then it had to go somewhere. And some say it went back to where it came from, and you get a solid dome of the heavens. Wouldn't the Apollo astronauts have noticed it when they went crashing through it?
Yeah,
Because nobody opened the windows. Nobody opened the windows for, as far as I'm aware.
Launch window!
No, but
Fiona,
Fiona, these are the same people who don't believe we went to the moon. That's what you have to remember.
Fiona, did you never watch?
So the shuttle didn't blow up; it ran into this giant ice block.
Somebody forgot to open the window.
Fiona, did you never watch?
They missed the window; they hit the wall.
Bounce off the top of the atmosphere, yeah, go on.
You know, watch Buck Rogers in the 25th Century? That clearly had like a gate in space, which the ships went through when they went to the other places in the like Federation thing. So that's.
I only watched Buck Rogers in the 25th Century because Erin Gray was unbelievally gorgeous.
Oh no, it's all about Ardala.
Yeah.
So,
Butch Rogers, the only superhero, the only space sci-fi hero with a beer gut.
Right, so to get back to the flood, right?
If I can say something about, okay, I can get back to the flood. I have something about the flood that, at least from seeing this from a different perspective. According to the documentary hypothesis, which is that there are multiple authors from Genesis to Exodus to Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus. According to that documentary hypothesis, we see that Genesis chapter 8 and 7, and most of it was written by 2 different authors. Mm-hmm. And according to the writing style and the verbiage and everything, they've determined that the author J only wrote that the flood was only supposed to be 40 days, and that was it. The flood was gonna be gone, and the boat was gonna come back down on the 40th day. It wasn't until the author P, the prophet, came in and added a whole extra year or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this kind of gets mixed up and spliced. Yeah. So it can only get worse.
Yeah, they were on the Ark for a year. If you actually check the date of when they went on and when they got off, it was a year.
Right.
I've had this argument with biblical literalists before. They claim they were only on the Ark for 40 days.
I think a lot of this.
Hold on a minute.
Sorry.
They claim that they were only on the Ark for 40 days because they haven't actually looked at the text. It tells you in relation to Noah's age, how old he was when he went on the Ark and how old he was when he came off the Ark. And there's a year of a difference. So
right, that was from the author P.
That now gets us into the husbandry of many animals.
Oh, God.
For a year on an Ark.
Yeah.
Before we get into that,
I find this.
I just want to say. I just want to say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cliff. Go ahead.
I find this stuff. This is where I think it gets bonkers because you've got the problem of the anteater saying, "Wait a minute, you only brought 2 ants." Things like that. The polar bears. What did they take a long walk back?
No. But here's the thing. Koala bears only eat eucalyptus.
Yeah.
So So he would have had to prepare special diet. Silkworms eat nothing but mulberry leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the duration of the voyage, the one thing that they're glossing over, the one thing that they're not telling you, is that everybody on that boat ate duck, right? Because everything had been killed, and the only flaw in God's plan was that ducks float, right? And when Noah looked out to sea, all he could see to the horizon, right, were dead bodies, ducks and swans, right? So that
I like duck. I'd be okay with that.
If I've actually done some math on this, on how much food was needed and how much water was needed, according to everything. So just for humans alone, for the 8 people there, they would have needed 5,840 pounds of food and 1,460 gallons of water.
Yeah.
Duck.
Can I also ask snakes, for example, only eat live food. So, what was he feeding them? What was he feeding them?
Could you let a heavy hauler ask his question, please?
So, okay, and so elephants, they would require over 321,000 pounds of food, 38,000 gallons of water. Again, where are they storing this water? Because if now of course this is when we talk about salinity. There was no ocean salinity.
Don't you say there's some very rapid evolution going on after they land all the animals?
Yeah, we haven't got to that. We haven't got to that yet. We haven't got to the disembarkation yet. We're still busy mucking them out.
Yeah, we've got the problem of extra ballast.
Cleaning up all the poop.
Have you?
And something that the big thing that's going around the internet was this calculation done by some Lancaster physics students on the buoyancy of the arc. Now they only consider the arc effectively as a point particle.
Mm-hmm.
They don't consider the actual structure of the ship. They don't consider wave impacts on the ship. They don't consider anything like that. And I'm pretty sure if it hit a wave square on, it would break in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me say a quick thing about the arc, about the structure of the arc. In one of his in a podcast, Tim Bruggencate went on about rubbished people's mocking of the Ark by going on about this replica that's been built in Holland, saying that Ken Ham's Ark will just be a bonus because it's already been done in Holland. And I pissed myself because I'd read an article a couple of days later about it, and the one in Holland is a steel-framed ship clad in cedar timbers, right? It doesn't float. It is resting on a steel barge.
Yeah.
It's not even floating.
Right. Let's put that baby in the water, load it up with a few million pounds of animals, and bombard it with waves and see how well it floats then. Even with a steel structure, it probably wouldn't float with that much weight on it.
Yeah, because it's a good question. There've actually been reports of modern ships having their hulls dented from waves.
Oh, there have been reports of modern ships breaking in half, actually breaking in half and sinking within 4 minutes. The SS Cyclops was one of them, and all of her sister ships did that, and they were steel hulled.
Yeah, they're designed for certain stresses, and certain stresses are basically they take a flyer on them, hoping that they're never going to suffer those stresses.
Yeah.
Yeah,
now, I wanted to bring up
how did Noah live to be hundreds of years old?
God did it.
No. I don't want to get into that one. I wanted to go on to, it was Heavy Hauler's question. Poop and pee. Now,
yes, sanitation on board.
I have two horses. It takes me an hour to muck out 2 horses every day.
Yeah, let me just say this also. The ark, the cabins, the decks, and the rooms, they would have had to have been underwater for a lot of these animals. So you can't just push this stuff overboard, right? It would have been below the waterline.
Also, for that.
Also, I have a very good friend who works at the San Francisco Zoo, and it takes a crew of 12 people for the gorillas alone.
Mm-hmm.
For the gorillas alone, this is a group of 8 people taking care of all of what 20,000 animals. So
I did the math on that, and they said with all, even just a few thousand, like the bare minimum amount of animals that could have been on the Ark, they would have had to have devoted 30 seconds to each group of animals every day, every hour. They would never be able to sleep, never been able to do anything else but continue to work, and they would have about 30 seconds to play with.
This is one of the reasons why they say that it was Kynes. which will become relevant later on. So they didn't have to take one of every species because they're trying to cut the numbers down. But they're still left with an awful lot of poop. Now, one theory that I heard, which on the face of it actually seemed to be a serious attempt at dealing with the question of poop, was, they had a moon pool through the middle of the ark. Now, the problem there is, in a timber structure like that, if you cut a moon pool into it, can you imagine the torsional stresses on that? And to increase the buoyancy, because the moon pool had reduced the buoyancy and stability.
And have you ever tried to push a big giant broom with a bunch of poop to the center of the thing? Like, that's some steel brooms to be able to push elephant poop.
But to increase the buoyancy, the moon pool had caused to drop. What they did was they got some great big rocks and they drilled a hole through the middle and they tied them onto ropes and they hung the ropes off the side of the ark into the water, and that increased its buoyancy. Now, I have never known anybody to build a rock life jacket.
Oh boy, now that's stretching it.
Well, hang on. The moon pool's at the bottom of the boat, right? The water comes halfway through. Right, the moon pool's at the bottom of the boat, right? And the water comes up the sides. How did they seal the ark? Bear in mind it's made out of fucking wood. How did they seal the ark so that you could maintain atmospheric pressure inside it so that it kept the water out?
I know, I'm in as much pain as you are, but I had to put that forward because at least it was somebody having a decent attempt at explaining it. Now, yes, it was a complete landlubber's explanation, but at least they tried. They did try.
On the subject of urine, though, it's perhaps like on the famous voyage of Blackadder with Captain Redbeard Rum. At least they had a selection of very fine wines.
I feel really sick.
Wayne, you're evil.
Oh, you sick bastard.
But some of them had a familiar nose, I'm told, Wayne.
And the other question I have to ask is, where did he keep the termites and the woodworm? And there's a brilliant cartoon of all the Noahs looking over the side of the ark, and there's this wee woodpecker on the side, and Mrs. Noah saying, "I'm sorry, Noah, but the woodpecker's got to go."
Hey, Fiona. Also, all of the 8 people on the ark, one of them would have had to have been carrying measles. One of them would have had to have been gonorrhea. One of them would have had to have been carrying syphilis, because all of those diseases are only hosted by humans.
No, they had sheep. They had sheep. That's where the gonorrhea came from.
Well,
the diseases weren't around back then.
So where did they come from? So
no, diseases came from the fall, didn't you know? They must have been there. They must have been.
Okay, fine. Maybe my point wouldn't hold up to a young Earth creationist.
What you have to remember though is that we are told that disease, etc., came because of the fall. That means the diseases had to be around before the flood.
There you go.
You can't say they came after the flood.
So somebody on board had to have been carrying these diseases because they're only hosted by humans, and if all the other humans were dead, the diseases would have been dead also. That was my
So that's another problem we have. So I think really the bottom line is we have no solution for the problem of the poop and the problem of the pee. We don't know how they got rid of it. If they kept it all on board, then it would get rather hot.
But what they could have done, they could have used the apes and the monkeys as trained slaves, and they could have carried it upstairs on buckets.
Maybe we're trying to herd cats.
No. Monkeys like slinging shit, right? Should have been in their element, right? I mean, it'd be like a couple of propellers going down either side with these big long arms, wouldn't it? Lob, lob, lob.
No, they form a conga line of all the apes, and they just
onto the ceiling
to the top.
But when your belief system has an argument called the shit argument that can refute you, you've got a problem.
Perhaps they actually trained the animals to shit on a special slide to go out the actual ark.
Maybe they just held it in for like a year.
Yes.
What, they had the bottom inspectors to make sure that they didn't have one.
Yes. This actually brings up another question. We've dealt with poop, we've dealt with pee, now the parps. And the problem with the parps, the methane parps, now, it's not that much of a problem until you have a wee look at Ken Hoven's description of some of the animals on the ark. Because he includes the fire-breathing dragons. Now, my problem there is, if you have fire-breathing dragons on a wooden vessel full of methane, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of matchsticks and animal soup. Unless you have an asbestos-lined room in which to keep your dragons. And then the question is, but were dragons clean or unclean?
How to tread your dragon?
The thing is,
Fiona,
hold on. This sounds like we're making fun of floodists, but these are the arguments I have actually heard.
You know,
these are arguments that have been given to me to explain how the flood can be literally true. It was.
Was the asbestos produced? Was the asbestos produced in those factories that Pillbox prepared?
Yeah, just out the back of the strip clubs.
So if the flood was a miraculous event, aren't they better off just claiming that the whole thing was miraculous? All these questions. I mean, instead of trying to come up with scientific, answers for this stuff, just give up and say it was all a miracle, please. Stop trying to give us science-based arguments for this bullshit.
Then that creates the biggest question of all.
I'm just seeing a comment in the side chat.
What does it say? What does it say?
It says, that's how the ark floated. Farts.
Yeah, that's what
I couldn't resist.
It was a bad airship.
Oh dear. Oh,
see, this is proof that it doesn't matter how old you are, fart jokes are still funny.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, can you imagine? Can you imagine the occupants of the ark when they got to land? They were saying, "I am not eating another egg as long as I live."
But that's another question. All the food would have been absolutely crushed to pieces under the immense pressure of the water.
Yeah.
So there'd be nothing to eat.
Yeah.
No, I'm on about the smell of eggs putting people off them for life.
Yeah. I can't imagine what happened with the pigs because that's how they became unclean.
Yeah, but let's just keep that bit for when we get off the ark.
But honestly, Fiona, when we get off the ark, to me, is where you really start getting into the biggest problems of all. I mean,
so we've worked out that we're baffled by how they had enough food for the journey, what they did with the poop, the pee, how they stopped from exploding with their dragons on board without asbestos, and let me think. There was something.
Oh, and the dragons.
Yeah, that was it. That's how all the parts. So
there's another problem.
Yes.
There's another problem I can see here, which is what happened to the fish Fish swim, so they would be all right. However, is this freshwater or saltwater?
Exactly.
Either way, one of them is dead.
Yes.
Well, see, now, the thing is creationists is going to say, and I've had this before because they said there was no salt water at the time. There was only fresh water. And hold on, I'll get you there. Hold on. This is where it gets good. They said that there were the underwater salt domes, or underground salt domes, or whatever, that they knocked over, and that's where the salt came from. And that's how the salt got into the ocean.
Well, that explains that.
Oh, I'm sorry. My little brain is beginning to blister here. Right, okay, salt domes, that's fine. That's
Wouldn't it have killed all
smashing.
the fresh? Wouldn't it have killed all the freshwater fish immediately?
That'll be where all the water went.
Rapid evolution
Oh,
of
yes.
the creatures. It was a very slow increase of salination in the water, and animals slowly evolved. And or maybe these species, or these species, we don't know exactly what they were. Maybe they were not as resistant or as weak to salt water as we think of fish are now today. So yeah, it's a whole bunch of unknowns to answer that.
Now, this has just brought to mind something which happened, which was actually quite a scary incident. Rats. I'm just going to dump. I'm trying to put a link into the chat. Now, this is what happens when water gets in a salt. Wrong one. Sorry, I'm really struggling here. I'm having big problems.
Is this the salt mine underneath the
Yes.
the lake? And it turned. Yeah, that's an awesome. I can't. Can't remember the name of the lake.
I've just found Lake Pena.
That's the one.
I've got it here. Now, what happened was they were drilling for oil, but due to a miscalculation, they drilled in the wrong place, and they drilled through the roof of a salt mine. There we go. Now, the problem with salt is it dissolves in the water. Now, none of the miners were killed, but as the water went in, the cavity got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the entire lake drained down into the sinkhole, and in fact, the Gulf of Mexico started draining into it because the rivers ran backwards, and barges got caught up in it and sucked right down.
Wow.
And only once it all equalised did those barges then pop up again, like little corks.
Wow.
I've put a link to a video, and I think one of the funniest things I think is something about that when the drilling rig lurched to the side, everybody evacuated it, and then they watched in horror as I think it was a 70-foot tall drilling rig sank out of sight.
Wow.
In 10 feet of water. Because the whole thing just went flump. So that's what's going to happen if salt domes are the way in which the salt got into the water. And I don't think that things were so different back then that salt didn't dissolve in water. Because if that was the case, then Noah's physiology would be completely wrong as well.
Yeah.
So we have to assume the same physical laws at flood time. As soon as we start changing them, then we have to actually change the biology of the animals, etc. We have to change Noah's biology. And I don't think that's really going to be feasible. So, are we saying then, bottom line, we can't feed the animals, we can't clean their poop, we can't get rid of their wee, we can't get rid of their parps, and they might have exploded and basically they smelled a lot. So now we come to let's all get off the ark. And this
you forgot one thing, Fiona. You got the ammonia poisoning.
Oh, yeah, that would be horrific.
And
that does terrible damage to your lungs.
Oh, if I can also add one thing about another thing that creationists like to talk about when it comes to the flood is the sheer amount of volcanoes that would have had to have erupted because of all the formation of these mountains. And Wildwood Clare, a geologist, had calculated the amount of SO2 and CO2 would have been released. It would have been like 7 trillion tons or some crap like that, an incredibly high amount. And so they would have just died. I mean, just asphyxiated. Just choking on, and if they hadn't already been turned, overheated from the steam release, and or gotten hypoxia from high elevation sickness.
Yeah. If they'd gone on deck, they would have been dissolved, basically. So they're now floating in acid soup. That's not good.
Yeah, volcanoes.
That can't be good.
Let's not forget all the methane and CO2 that's gone and been released from. I can't remember what the hell they call them, but they're on the bottom of the ocean.
The methane hydrates.
That's the ones. Yeah.
Oh yes.
And then how about just also just to finish off the flood topic, 6,000-year-old Earth radioactive decay. If radioactive decay was really going that fast, the amount of radioactivity on the planet would have been the flood would have been the least of Noah's problems.
Right.
It would have made it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's more of a problem for young Earth creationism in general than for the flood specifically.
Yeah.
Right.
Earth would have melted down.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, heat really is, like so many of these arguments come back to the amount of heat that would have been produced by all of these processes if you condense it into such a short period of time.
Right.
Like there's about 15 different inputs to that heat problem that when you add them up, and even individually, I mean, basically the Earth would still just be like a molten lava lump floating through space.
Limestone formation as well, right? Because it has to be. It takes a long time and a lot of
tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
So all you have to do is consider one of them. And
Right, when you add up all of them, and for crying out loud, it becomes so ridiculous you can't even. It's astonishing to me that someone could take this seriously.
Yeah. So now let's get off the ark. Let's actually all wander down the gangplank.
We're disembarking here.
Yes.
Which let's bear in mind that Noah was asked to do it twice. The boat landed, and he sat in there for a month. It actually gives you the dates. In the Bible, it gives you the date that the ark landed, and then he went, and after it had landed, it had grounded out on the hills. He then went and sent the dove and the raven out, right, to go and look to see if they could find any land. Maybe to find out why the boat wasn't fucking moving anymore.
You didn't just have one pair of bird kind then, obviously, with a raven and a dove.
Exactly.
That's right. There's two different ones. He sends the raven out, and then and that doesn't come back, but the dove does come back, and it comes back with the
olive branch.
With the olive branch, and only then and only then does he get out. But
how did the olive survive?
How did
the olive survive?
Oh, magic!
They don't like damp conditions.
Yeah, I know.
It was damp. I mean, it was underwater. It was a tad damp.
The problem is that back then, the people who wrote this didn't consider plants to be living things. That's why, even though all the plants were eating plants, all the animals were eating plants, there was no death in the world because plants were not living things. So they would have seen them as just a property of ground.
Yes. Yeah. So we wander down the gangplank, okay? And we have got to get everybody to their destination. Now,
no,
I've heard of only one attempt to explain. I've heard two attempts. One is that it was still all one continental mass.
Yes.
Because nations were divided in the days of Peleg, okay? But I think we can say that that's a bit that's pushing it a bit to the text.
The other one's the kangaroo cannon.
What it was that the animals got to Australia Because they were blasted there by volcanic
How?
activity of Mount Ararat.
Wait. I missed that, Fiona.
So-
they were what?
They were blasted.
They were blasted there by the eruption of a volcano. Mount Ararat's a volcano.
Volcano.
Has all these slightly singed, ballistic
AKA
koala bears
kangaroo
and kangaroos flying through the air and getting from Turkey to Australia.
Even though the impact
Trailing
was
flames.
They had parachutes in the pouches.
No,
Why were
no
they
wonder
also-
no wonder the polar bears are white.
My first question is why only marsupials were on that volcano?
Well, now there is. Now I need to find this. I have a quote. I wish I'd looked this out earlier. It's
The duck-billed platypus had a bit of a mid-air collision with something else.
I have got to find it. It's a post. in a forum.
This really can't. If this is the explanation, it's just. I mean, this is just.
It's a real explanation, yes. I've heard it before. It's real. It's not made up.
This is unbelievable.
The better one that they like to use is the bridge, land bridges. Some people tried it out, but I think now it's the land bridge is the best one that they've come up with.
And there was a security guard who only let marsupials through?
I'm trying to find this.
Do you realize how
What do you think angels are for?
Maybe this cannon is where this, you know, there's a game where you can shoot penguins. You know, one of these little flash cartoon games. You know, maybe this is where the idea for that came along.
That were whacking them with a big
Birds on
baseball
giant
bat,
snake
weren't
shot.
it?
Sorry, what was that, Wayne?
That were whacking them with a big baseball bat, weren't it?
I know the one. I play it from time to time. It's a great game.
My favorite.
Put it in the
I think the
chat.
second version of it got bloody though.
My favorite of the post-flood problems is beetles. That that we have identified about 800,000 species of beetles, and we think there's probably twice that many that we haven't, or at least that many that we haven't yet identified. So if he took 2 of the beetle kind on the Ark, that means that they have been speciating at a rate of 1 every few hours over the last 4,500 years. Like basically every time a beetle has sex, a whole new species of beetle comes out.
Right, I've actually found this post. Posted in a forum, and it's one of those posts you never ever forget. So I'm going to read this out. It was in a thread, how did the Aborigines get to Australia? And somebody had suggested that when the humans repopulated Australia, they took along their favourite marsupials. And the answer to this was as follows. It was by somebody called Dr. Adequate. And it was posted in the evcforum.net back in 2011. Well, some problems. I can't speak. Right, one.
I have a feeling that Fiona's got a stupidity file.
Yeah.
Here's
No,
stupid
actually, I
things
had to
people
go
have
to
said
the
over the
forum to
years.
find it. Right, here we go. You ready? 1. There is evidence of marsupials in Australia before humans. 2. How did they manage that without leaving one single marsupial behind in Eurasia? 3. Why did they have this big fetish for marsupials and bring along all the kangaroos and wallabies and potoroos and wombats and bandicoots and Tasmanian devils and koalas and marsupial moles and 10 different kinds of beetle, rather than spoil their record by bringing along something useful like a sheep? What was going through their heads? No, sheep won't work in Australia. Let's have another thing with a pouch. And let's not forget all the extinct mammals, like the protodon, a wombatty thing the size of a rhinoceros, which they apparently thought would be useful for some reason. 4. It is extremely unlikely that their favourite marsupials would have included the Tasmanian devil, an animal Wikipedia describes as noted for its pungent odour, extremely loud and disturbing screech, and ferocity, and downright unthinkable that anyone would want to share a boat or a continent with a 9-foot-tall carnivorous kangaroo, now mercifully extinct. 5. And that's just the mammals. Let's not forget the snakes and spiders. Apparently they thought no continent would be complete without the addition of the most venomous species on Earth. Sixth, I can't find a shred of evidence that the Australian Aborigines ever had any form of transport larger than a dugout canoe. This would present them with severe difficulties in transporting all of this stuff. Now, somebody commented, I guess he could instead be thinking that they reached Australia the same way islands can become populated by immigrant species that arrive via floating vegetation, which is dealt with as follows. Once again, I would have to ask, why all the marsupials? We can at least imagine the first settlers being perversely selective in this way, but how could one attribute it to mere chance? And again, one would have to ask, how come no marsupials were left behind? Somehow, this floating vegetation managed to separate out all of the marsupials from the placental mammals, which would be an act of exceptional acumen for driftwood, which is usually not noted for its intelligence. And to me, that is just one of the best answers I've ever come across.
Intelligent drifting.
Yes. Intelligent
Sounds
driftwood.
like an album title.
Is this ID?
No.
ID, no, intelligent drifting.
Seaweed with GPS.
Yeah. So, well, no, it's not so much of that. It's got to actually, it's got to stop the non-marsupials getting on, and it's got to make sure it's got every marsupial.
Seaweed that can see.
Yeah, and then you've also got the problem of, it's going to be really unfortunate if one of the big cats comes off the ark just at the back of the sloth, because the sloth isn't exactly going to run away.
Ah, well, that's the thing. That's why we don't have dinosaurs. Can you imagine you survived the flood only to be eaten the day after? That's a real pisser. And actually, the first thing, because you turn around and say, yeah, okay, they all came off the ark. The first thing they actually did when they came off the boat was fire up the barbie and chuck some animals on it. And raise up an altar to the Lord, and then you got the rainbow because the Lord saw how righteous that Noah was with his altar and his animals that he just sacrificed, having just tended for them for a fucking year. and away you go. Yeah.
Can you imagine a T-Rex leg? That's one as big as one big chicken leg, isn't it?
Well, that's right. I mean, you eat the large ones first. It's until everything else gets going. It's like, buy in bulk.
So here's the thing. Christianity went on for.
Would you like fries with that?
Christianity went on for a few thousand years without this idea, right? Wasn't it mainly a local flood in old Christian theology? So who came along? What brilliant Christian came along and said, you know what? I'm going to make my religion look even more ridiculous. Make this a global one.
I have to say, I do agree with that. I think that trying to talk about a literal flood.
Wasn't this George Smith?
It's ridiculous.
Oh, there is a guy. Okay, I didn't realize there was.
1872.
Actually, it's more ridiculous than you think.
It's like why would you come and crap the whole thing up with an?
The problem is that.
Go on, Wayne.
Oh, sorry. On the subject of intelligent drifting, isn't flood theory already far enough up the creek? Yeah,
I think it might just be. But the thing is, we've got to get our sloths to South America and our kangaroos to Australia, and they've all got to do it while remaining uneaten, while wading through miles of squishy sediment that was all laid down by the flood, remember, miles thick. How?
Yeah, has anyone ever noticed how slowly penguins walk?
Yeah, and the polar bears would have died of heat exhaustion in Turkey. So, how did all the animals get to where they're supposed to go? And I think they couldn't have.
The answer is simple. God made.
TEDx.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So once again, if we resort to God did it, then I would say, well, then don't try and use science to validate your flood theory.
Okay,
if
well,
every time you hit a problem, you're going to say, nah, God did it. God cleaned up the evidence. God transported the animal.
But this is where creationists are going to step in and say that it wasn't like there was polar bears on the ark. We would say something similar to, like, say, the black bear that just made his way, and over time they evolved. So they made its way to Antarctica somehow, and then they evolved.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, can I just mention one thing? It was an argument that was put forward about why you find certain layers in the fossil record, and it started off with hydrologic sorting, and then what you have to look at is why the birds are above the dinosaurs. Okay, and the theory was that when the flood started, Matt, I'm going to have to mute you because you're a big echo. It's really bad.
Really?
Yep. It's coming from you.
Okay.
Right, is that it? Yeah, that sorted it. Right, so this theory was put forward. As the floodwaters rose, so the living forms tried to run away. They ran up the hills. And
Oh no, she's not going where I think she is.
so that means that some of the flowering plants had to be able to run faster than certain ferns. But also,
Running ferns.
yeah, when the dinosaurs got to the top of the hills, the birds perched on their heads.
The what?
Birds perched on their heads.
I thought you said they pecked the heads.
They could fly around. They could fly around. The dinosaurs couldn't. Have you ever seen a T-Rex fly?
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, the birds get tired, so they had to have somewhere to sit during all this flood. They perched on the dinosaurs' head, and this is why you get this record in the fossils. It all depends on how fast they could run.
Unless they're ducks.
So the flowering plants could run so much faster than some of the weird ferny things.
Runner
And
beans.
the grasses.
Sorry.
Yeah, runner beans. So, but that is an argument I've actually heard. I just thought I would throw that one in. Have we decided that the disembarkation is a big problem because you're going through all the mud and it's going to be pretty toxic because of all the rotting corpses.
Oh.
Right? Because remember, everything's been killed. There's nothing been there to eat all these corpses that are now lying about. They're going to be stinking and horrible. So you're ploughing through that lot. You're trying to get away from predators. If you're a predator, you're desperately trying to catch your prey. And if your prey is unclean, there's only two of them. If you get one of them, that's it. It's had it.
Maybe they just like sucked on them for a bit, you know?
Well, they were like ice lolly.
Yeah. We'll just have a leg off that and let the rest run off.
Yeah. So it's that. I think that's another thing that points to the impossibility of the biblical. That a belief in a literal global flood for Noah and Mrs. Noah and all the little Noahs. So,
And let's not. Oh, we're moving on. Okay.
So, where I suppose really what we're saying is that we've found so many problems at so many different levels with the story of the flood.
Yeah, this is an assault course with nothing but massive walls.
Yeah.
And let us not forget the inbreeding depression of the animals afterwards.
Oh.
And then I was doing some little bit more research, and somebody actually contacted me and let me know that there would need to be a minimal of 60 to 80 different pairs of animals without experiencing some sort of inbreeding depression.
Yeah. In fact, it was that comment of yours that sort of gave me the idea of doing this hangout on the flood, to take this one thing and deal with it. And now, the other problem is that when you look back into genetics, the genetic record of various creatures, you don't see them all having a bottleneck. And of those that do have a bottleneck, it's at the wrong time. because the flood should be just over 4,000 years ago. And that also makes you think, well, ruminant animals, so you got your sheep and your goats and your cattle, whatever, they would all have had to evolve after they got off the ark. Horses and donkeys, etc. And yet we know that there were donkeys around at the time that Jesus was there. So you've only got 2,000 years to evolve your donkey.
Cats and lions.
Then you've also got the problem. What about the evolving humans? You know, where did black people and Asian people, you know, and Orientals and so on come from?
Yeah,
They've got that one covered. But is it?
Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel.
Wait, was the Tower of Babel after the flood or before the flood?
after.
Oh, okay.
Can anybody remember roughly the time span between the flood and the Tower of Babel? Also known as the Stargate.
It's not all that many generations, actually.
No.
No, I think Noah would still have been alive at the time of it. It's not
Come on,
that
Paul,
many.
you should have known this. It's in your book.
I know I should. It's not all that many. It's only about 10 generations or something like that. If that, it's not that many at all. Because it's only down the first page that you get Nimrod of that particular chapter.
What did you call me?
Nimrod was the king that built the Tower of Babel.
No. I was making a joke. I was like,
I
what did you call me?
Yeah, I guess.
So
it's not so much the Tower of Babel, it's the 26 people who built the pyramids.
yeah. Well, yeah, I can see that's a problem there.
At the same time, the flood's going on, I believe, as well.
Yeah, that's a problem because all these other civilizations don't show any sort of check.
When all's said and done, that's got to be the biggest thing. The Egyptians and things like that, the similar time periods. Everything else, because we all know that creationists and fundies have got a plaster for every cut, or band-aid for every cut for the Americans present. Yeah, surely the problem of the population of Egypt has got to be the biggie.
Yeah, because it's in the same region.
There's no way around it. There's no metaphorical explanation way around it.
No, but we do have. There is some evidence that the Bosphorus flooded.
Funnily enough, that's what I put earlier on in the sidebar.
Yeah. That that narrow little channel used to be like a dam, and it eroded away, and then that caused a local flood in the area.
I believe that actually did happen within human memory as well. So, but it's in the wrong time frame and it's in completely the wrong area.
The one that
but
is
it's not,
actually...
is it? Because the Black Sea, which is the sea that rose very quickly, that puts it in Turkey. Yeah. But the Bosphorus is Istanbul, on the coast of is the river that goes past Istanbul, and it's basically Turkey, Russia, Ukraine. I'm trying to remember where else now. But it's it's got this big sort of circle of societies.
And Ararat's in Turkey.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great if the flood myth was somewhat unique to the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic religions, but it's not.
No, it's not.
It's the Turkish bit is about as west as it's going to get, but you also have stuff that's over in India, and you also have stuff that is very much centered around the Gulf area with it
Babylon.
Yeah,
but don't forget there are floods all over the place. I mean, India gets flooded every decade or so. Big horrible floods.
No, I mean literally. I mean, the Epic of Gilgamesh is almost the same story with different names.
Yeah, I think the biblical flood is basically a Michael Bay movie. It's a bigger flood.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, if you bear in mind that this will have been written as a poem, and there's a lot of imagery in there. There's a lot of imagery in there. If you take it as Noah actually being something like a riverboat trader, somebody that went up and down, a businessman who owned a boat that went up and down a river, that went into flood, that particular area, if you look, I'm trying to think of the particular river that they say flooded.
The Euphrates and the Tigris.
Yeah, that's it. Yes, the area it would have been. It's very, very flat there, so it would have been something as far as the eye can see. Now, somebody that goes up and down a river all the time, the mountains in the distance are always in the distance, and if you think about parallax and everything, they're always there. They're always there. Now, if you get washed out to sea, the first thing that you will notice is you don't think you're moving, but you are. Right, because you don't perceive a flow, but you'll move away from the land. Now, somebody that has never been out to sea, has never been away from the coast at all, that is washed out to sea, will see the land disappear under flood. Bear in mind that the land may be already flooded, but will also then see the mountains disappear over the horizon and appear to disappear under the floodwaters and then rise again. And in the Bible story that you hear, you actually hear that the mountains rise again, and then he lands. He doesn't land on the top of a mountain, and it really does, if you look at it just on imagery alone, sound like a story where somebody gets washed out to sea and then comes back again.
Yeah, it does.
This is one of those stories where the fish was this big.
Yeah. But that said,
big fish, little fish, cardboard box.
Only half the story actually survives in today's Christian Bible. A lot of it, the reason for it, the actual reason for the flood has all been taken out because it's all batshit insane. Everybody's having a pop at that Noah movie that came out with like the I don't know, stone angels and all that kind of crap. That actually sounds quite sane compared with some of the stuff that's actually in the apocryphal the Book of Enoch that was taken out, with giants the size of mountains and that went around killing everybody, you know, as being the reason for the flood. But hey, there you go.
Well, I thought it was because we were breeding with the Nephilim.
Yeah,
something weird, or breeding with the angels, and the whole thing is just.
And those Nephilim
mythology, a fable is a story to teach you some sort of moral truth. Like the tortoise in the hare.
Don't fuck with God.
Sorry, what was that?
I was saying the moral truth of that was don't fuck with God. Apparently, and that was do as He says, otherwise He's going to flood the planet.
Quite literally, that's the only good reason for leaving it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, the apocryphal Book of Enoch has all been contracted down to the single line, which goes along the lines of there were giants in the earth in those days. And that's literally the only bit that's left in. But the thing is, there's a whole heap of stuff that was all taken out, and it is absolutely batshit insane. I tell you, go read it and try and keep a straight face. You look at it and you think, you know, one does not simply walk into Mordor. It is proper Lord of the Rings shit. It really is. About giant, there's these giant characters that are actually going on adventures and everything. It's really, really screwed up.
It's the old story, though, of a folk tale that has been sort of pinched or borrowed into a religious myth, and the origins of it have been lost.
Yeah, the thing is though,
survives.
Later on, I think it's in the New Testament, Jesus actually references the Book of Noah, the Book of Enoch, should I say. Certain parts about the Book of Enoch are referenced in the New Testament. But the thing is, nobody talks about that because when you look at it, you realize it's absolutely insane.
And I've actually had this dealing with somebody. When you're talking about Noah, they gave the message. They're like, oh yeah, but see, what it was is God told Noah to tell everybody about the flood and that they were going to get on the boat with him. But you don't see that in Genesis. In Genesis, they're actually just saying, no, it's just you and those 7 other people. But in the New Testament, it paints a picture that Noah was going around telling people, and they were laughing at him and scoffing at him and all that.
Yeah.
But so it lets you know that we're hearing 2 different stories now. Somebody's not right.
Well, I was going to chime in. By the way, hi. And I hit on this with Wayne earlier in a conversation tonight. That's kind of because ancient Judaism is not what Judaism became later on, and is not what it is today. It was much more of a tribal religion, but even more so than people realize, there is strong, clear evidence now that the Canaanites, who were quote unquote wiped out by the Israelites, that the Israelites themselves were in part the Canaanites, who probably revolted against many of their city masters because they had a very slave-oriented society, and that it was just basically a general conglomeration of myths and religions that sort of coalesced in this area where I am at the time. So you have these different stories basically taking off of each other. Some which were pagan, some which were monotheistic, and for hundreds of years that did not actually change, because you have archaeological evidence here in Israel where houses from before the Second Temple building, and even far before that, actually still had Canaanite gods in them, statuettes. So, and there are many injunctions in the Jewish religion against being, pagan, against worshiping many gods. So there is strong archaeological and historical evidence now in the last, say, 20 or 30 years that these stories were not just did not just come out of Judaism itself, but Judaism evolved out of a sort of mix of pagan ideas and monotheistic ideas, all in the same area and with the same, in fact, people at the same time, which is why you will get so many conflicting stories in the Bible, and why you get so many different versions of it. There, that's what I had to say.
I agree.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that was one of the things that I was finding when I was writing literally Genesis. There's a myriad of different traditions for most of the stories that you think you know. And most of what you think you know didn't actually happen that way. I mean, everybody thinks that God made that Genesis talks about God making the earth, and then the Adam and Eve story, and then the apple. Actually, they don't. There's 2 creation stories,
right?
And then there's the story of the of apples and things like that.
Right.
They do not. It does not. What you think you know about it is not how it really happened.
Yeah, and in fact, it was far more evident before the writing of the Talmud, during the Babylonian capture. What happened is, during the Babylonian capture, because the Jewish people wanted to, let's say, keep their monotheism alive, they as many people know, they rewrote the Bible. That's where you get the different versions of the Bible, and that's why you have these pagan ideas, etc., and conflicting, portrayals of God from the Babylonian period on. So it is not a, Judaism is a clear evolution of a religious tradition and belief from a tribal pagan sort of God to a monotheistic God, but with still pagans living amongst them and sharing stories, to a much more solidified and rewritten pagan God, which later transforms into Judaism as we know today after the destruction of the temple. So you see a clear evolution of how people thought about religion and culture in their lives in a way that you actually don't see with many other religions, because Christianity has evolved, but it has had much less time to do so, and it also did not start with the same kind of crazy tribal ideas that Judaism started with. They were much more of a refined idea of Judaism, and went on from that. So, but with Judaism, you see it right from the beginning, right from basically Stone Age beliefs in a sense, going up through monotheism and then Judaism as we know it today. That's why fundamentalists who take the Bible literally are just so insane, frankly, and they cannot really put a plaster. See there, I said it. They cannot put a plaster on these cuts and bruises because there's just no way to do it. You can't reconcile the evolution, the changes in thought, and you cannot just smooth over these problems because they wear different stories, and they did not jive with the idea of what Christianity has today. They just don't.
Yep.
I'm sorry I killed the conversation. I really
How do Jewish people view the story?
Oh, well, unless you're talking about the fundamentalist black hats, they do not take it literally. Not at all. Not at all.
I've spoken with quite a few rabbis and a couple of people, and they just basically overall there was a consensus of that. To say that the creationism or the creation of the Earth and the universe was a 6-day thing, it would be just a dramatic cheapening of the event. Like it's a shallow representation of what they believe actually did happen. It's just more of a poetic versus.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind that they're mostly very liberal. Most Jews are liberal to. Even agnostic, it's just the fundamentalist ones you mostly hear about, but it seriously represents a tiny portion of Jews, which I described to Wayne earlier tonight as the total number of Jews in the entire world is actually smaller than some African tribes. So when you get right down to it, it's not taken seriously by the majority of Jews, and that's kind of they've moved on. They've moved on.
As was explained to me by Nathaniel earlier on, the fundamentalist Jews are only present in Israel. The ones that you see in Orthodox clothing throughout the world are not proper fundamentalist.
Well, they're fundamentalists, but not in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. The ones in Israel, from as per my understanding of my chat with Nathaniel, the ones in Israel, they're the equivalent of like pre-sup Christians and things like that.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is when you bring up this understanding of the Bible, the Jewish understanding of the Bible, to a fundamentalist Christian, they'll just reject that. I tried to explain on one of these hangouts that the Jews don't interpret the Old Testament in this very fundamentalist way, and it seems to me that since it was their book, don't you think that they have a better understanding?
Yeah,
you should maybe yield to their opinion. And the Jews rejected Jesus. They rejected Moses.
Well, as Lewis Black says, it's our book. You don't see a rabbi commenting on Saturday morning TV on your book, our book, which wasn't good enough for you. You have to go and make your own book. So comment on your own book. There's. No,
but Nathaniel, the point I was trying to get at, Nathaniel, is this idea that it's even interpreted biblically why the Jews are wrong about the Old Testament.
I mean, I know it's a stupid argument, but this goes all the way back to, the schism between Christianity and Judaism. And for what it's worth, the Christians at that time were the fundamentalist crazies, in fact, which is why most Jews rejected them, because they said, no, this has got nothing to do with what we believe in our culture, etc. But in a sense it did, because it did come out of Judaism. It did come out of those traditions. It came out of a fundamentalist evangelical understanding of Judaism, which, because of the politics in the time, was it had sort of a calling towards a lot of people who wanted to throw out the Romans.
Well, okay, here's oh, sorry, go ahead, Fiona. I was
just going to say, is there any other flood stuff that we want to cover?
I'd like to hear some more flood stuff that there is, because that's what got me in here, actually.
Yeah, just because I was trying to keep it pretty much on the flood. No. I just sort of tuned out for a little bit there because I was so tired of my thumb marks, because I jammed it in the hinge side of the stable door yesterday, and my nails going black. But I'm trying to think, what other aspects of the flood story have we not covered? I mean, we've covered where the water came from and where did it go. We've covered the poop, the pee, and the parts. We've covered
the post-flood,
how to get off the ark without being eaten. The animal equivalent of bog snorkeling to get from A to B. That is actually a sport. There is an annual world champion bog snorkeling. Did you not know that?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, there is. There's also a sport called bog trotting. I kid you not, I'll look these things up.
The first time I heard of it was on this hangout yesterday with Steve McDonough.
Oh, Steve, yeah,
he's a bog snorkeler, and I was like,
yeah,
do you see anything when you're under there? And he's like, dead animals, and I'm going, oh my god.
Steve is the bog trotter of atheism.
Yeah, the other one is extreme ironing. There are some brilliant photographs online of extreme ironing up mountains.
I've seen some really cool ones. Extreme juggler, battle juggling. Basically, you have a whole bunch of guys in a group, like 4 or 5 of them, juggling while trying to knock the other ones, items off while trying to maintain things. Like, I would actually watch that.
The other one that absolutely just got me, because I'm into rock climbing, and somebody was pointing out they were going up. It was a multi-pitch. They were going up, and they were struggling with it. And they were passed by 2 guys on pogo sticks.
I'd like to know where all the food came up from for everybody to survive after the flood.
Yes, because, as far as I'm aware, the plants, a year underwater.
There'd be no plant life left.
They're not going to survive.
How are those plants going to seed? Where are you going to get seeds to have new plants?
And I think Genesis 9:3, that was when God gave humans the okay to kill and eat animals for the first time. But with 8 mouths to feed and only 6 animals remaining of some species, and only 2 in other species, they would have been highly selective in their food choices.
They can't eat pork.
Yeah. All of the non-human animals also had nothing to eat except each other.
Right, and the ecosystem would have been completely destroyed. It's a very delicate balance of small insects and and other small plants and other things to make an ecosystem thrive, and that's all gone now. So,
can I ask a question? Whereabouts in the Bible does it tell you what animals are clean and what are unclean?
Exactly.
Leviticus, yeah.
Right, and that is post-flood.
How did they know what a clean animal was?
Bingo!
Exactly.
Also, Fiona, the first thing that I think it was you who brought up the raven and the pigeon bringing back an olive branch. That's the end of the idea of a global flood right there. If there was an olive tree alive off the boat, that's it. That's the end. That's it. It's a local flood.
Yeah. Oh, wait a second. How long were they on Mount Ararat before they left the ark?
At least a month.
Yeah.
That's not enough time for an olive tree to grow.
So the whole ecosystem reestablished itself in a month.
It's not only the ecosystem's a problem. The soil would be fucked.
Aye.
Right.
Oh, definitely. Right. And not only that, they're sitting on Ararat, right? So they've got sort of, I say dry land underneath them, but it would have been a tad moist. but they're trying to find out what else has popped up. So obviously they can't see any other land other than what they're sitting on.
And they're sitting on that land for quite some time before they actually go and realise they're actually sitting on land. I know it sounds really fucked up, but it really is. Have a look at it, and...
I mean, the Leviticus thing, I mean, in Noah's day, all the animals were considered clean because God said so in Genesis 9:3.
Yeah,
every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things.
Yeah. So why is Noah told to take 1 pair of unclean and 7 of the clean?
Because clean obviously refers to livestock animals that can be eaten.
Yeah, but the problem is using those terms clean and unclean. Because if they weren't told what was clean and what was unclean until after the flood, how on earth could Noah know which ones to take 2 of and which ones to take 7 of?
Because God can see into the future.
Here. I do have an idea here. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah, God can see into the future and told Noah what would be clean and unclean later on.
But he doesn't actually. There is no list there of saying these are the animals that are clean and these are the animals that are unclean.
No, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like trying to take the creation story of the Greeks, you know, with the gods and Zeus hammering open the head and Athena springs out. It's you know, they're not meant to be taken. I mean, let me put it to you this way: have you ever heard of a Jewish organization that's trying to find the ark, you know, where it's rested? No, because and I'll tell you why. The reason why is because if you do talk to Jews who believe in the literal creation of you know, story and the flood. There, as I said, there are some. They will tell you that, you know, all these things that trying to prove it that it's real. That's not their concern. You know, it could be magic for all. I mean, God said it was, and it was, and that's all there is to it. It's only Christian fundamentalists who are trying to prove it with quote unquote science. And that should tell you something right there, that even the fundamentalists will just say, give up and say, well, you know, God said it and that's it. Whereas, you know, at least you know where they're coming from, and okay, they have an honest, stupid position. But, you know, the Christian fundamentalists are trying to prove this with, you know, science and research, and it just looks utterly disingenuous and moronic beyond words. And
that was a point we were trying to make earlier, was that if you just take it as a miracle, okay, fine. We don't have anything to say about it. But if you're trying to bring science into it, that's when it kind of grates us, right? It gets grating, you know.
Yeah, and that's what, you know. That's why, I mean, I don't go around arguing with Jewish fundamentalists, because basically, I understand their position. I disagree with it, but they're not in that sense. They're not infringing upon science and my territory. But you know, if they try to teach in school, that's different. But yeah.
From a food point of view, the Bible, I mean, I think it's Genesis 8:20-21. Noah decimated about 1/7 of the population of clean animals anyway, in a burnt offering to God.
Yeah.
So they killed 1/7 of their food since they got off the ark by burning it in sacrifice.
Yeah, if you take the creation story and the flood and Tower of Babel as parables or something, you know, like to teach a truth or something, or to have a moral to it, a morality tale. It's easier to deal with them like that, because then you can read it and come away from it with some kind of truth or something, instead of trying to take it exactly literal and trying to cram billions of years of actual history into 6,000.
Yeah, if there is a moral message to it, you're definitely missing it by trying to bring in this nonsense. I mean, you're totally missing the point of the story, in my opinion, probably. If there is a moral point. I think that's debatable.
You've got to bear in mind as well that the definition of what truth is has changed over time. You can argue today that truth is a true account of actual factual happenings, that there really was a boat, there really was a bloke called Noah, there really was a flood, and prove that as a true factual event. But there's also the truth of the story. And when you're talking about narratives, you can also talk about how the example that is given within the story is true in itself, even though that the actual story itself may just be utter horseshit. I mean, how many science fiction, how many fantasy, how many works of fiction are technically true in the fact that that is what happens, that is a true moral dilemma, but the story that is just made up.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. We see stories very differently from people back then. You know, we can't conceive of how they thought, in a sense, and how they saw the world around them. It's almost impossible for us to do. So yeah, they you know, as in every society back then, stories really were a way to share far more than quote-unquote facts as they saw them.
Yeah, and in the New Testament, Christ was recorded as telling a lot of parables.
But
Yeah, and
the
he
thing
was
is,
trying
though,
to express a spiritual truth or something by using these little stories and parables or whatever.
the problem I have, though, with the message and truth of the flood story is what message is it trying to convey? Is it trying to convey? Is it trying to convey? Make a story that you can burn people at the stake for denying in medieval times, but yet will get the piss ripped out of it in the 21st century. Because
it's barbaric. The story of the flood is barbaric.
That's the only thing I can see. It's just it's laughter fodder.
Well, for me, I mean, Genesis 6:9 paints the picture that God handpicked Noah as a just man, perfect in his generations. But if he was as perfect as the Bible claims, then he wouldn't have been tainted with the imperfection of sin. And just as the descendants of Adam inherited that sin, the descendants of Noah would have inherited sinlessness. So Noah's descendants, which is supposed to be the entire human race, would have escaped from original sin and wouldn't need to be saved, which sort of makes the whole idea of Jesus' sacrificial death pretty superfluous.
Yeah, it is literally God fucking up. It's this all-powerful deity. It is the story of how something that he should be able to see the outcome of can't.
Yeah.
Because the situation that he should have been able to control, he couldn't. Right? So he almost reboots the franchise. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but here that's the key right there. The God of the flood is not the God later on that is omnipotent.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. The God of the flood is an earlier tribal god with flaws, but they say that he's still the strongest god there is. You know, the concept of monotheism is very gray at that point.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
You know, it wasn't there is only one God and all other gods are false. It was more, you know, our God is the best God and he's going to kick your God's ass. So there was that concept of monotheism, you know, quote-unquote monotheism back then. And that God was not, in a sense, they didn't have a concept yet of a completely omnipotent God. So that they're using a concept of a God that isn't all-powerful, but he's still godly and he still can flood the earth and he still can, you know, save mankind, etc. That's
involved.
Yeah, that's a different God than what later comes out of monotheism evolves into this supernatural, ethereal type of, you know, a non-corporeal being that is a universal concept.
Hey,
Right. We've gone on now for 2 hours and about 2 hours now, and I planned this to be 1 hour.
Yeah.
And I think we've covered quite a lot, and I think we've concluded that
Hello.
the flood.
ID coming
Sorry,
in.
I still had the video running when I logged in, so I was on mute until I got shut the video down. Otherwise, I'd have just. Sorry, Fiona. Carry on.
I think what we've done is we've shown the implausibility of a literal reading of biblical flood. I'm sure there will be people that will take issue with this. And I would love getting around some of the problems that we've highlighted. I think that would make for an interesting conversation. But I won't be able to go on the arguments that I've been subjected to in the past. You know, the arguments have made me laugh, they've made me cry, they've made me bang my head on the table, and basically I've lost the will to live with some of them. Have any of you ever heard a plausible explanation without invoking miracles?
No.
Not for a worldwide flood, unless it is a local flood with a rather embellished mythology.
Right.
Yeah.
I could buy that. I could buy that.
I mean, a local flood, and then you have whatever. If he was warned, ahead of time, like, okay, this is going to happen here, so we just go out and gather the local animals, I guess. The ones that are around in the area or something.
Yeah.
The thing is, you're going to hear about, and just that point about he was warned, you are going to hear about the guy who had this crazy notion that shit was going to happen, and he went and collected all his animals and went and lived on a raft out in the middle of the river, right?
A coracle.
Who just happened to be Noah, and he was right. But what you don't hear about are the crazy bastards that go and collect all the farm animals and live on a raft and were wrong.
Yeah. That is actually one of the arguments against this local flood I heard. Now, and G-Man made this argument, and actually, I was quite impressed, because he said if it was just a local flood, then why didn't Noah just move to higher ground? And that's actually a good question. I have to say that is a good question. And I think I think I would answer that in saying that if you've got to move you and all your livestock and all your family, everything, then it's not quite as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, I think it's more. It's simpler than that. I think that the Noah story was probably. I mean, the Noah story has been so embellished that we no longer. I mean, we can only suppose what happened, what really happened, and the flood it was probably a massive local flood. We know from some evidence in certain areas. And it did not. There wasn't a guy who was preparing this, etc. He may have he may have had just a bigger barge than anybody else, and he just took what he could and he put them in there, and that was the end of it. But through the retelling, there are more and more embellishments about how he prepared and how big this thing was and how long it lasted and what the intention was for it, because everything back then was a sign from God or the gods. And so there might be a kernel of truth to the story that some guy survived on his, as we know, it's called a coracle now. But yeah. No, go ahead.
If it was a local flood, then the Bible verses wouldn't make sense.
But no, they're not supposed to. I mean,
it mentions that God will destroy everything from the face of the earth. He doesn't mention local or where you live.
I know.
Yeah, but I think that's an embellishment. Yeah. I mean, it could be said to be an embellishment of a remembered local flood event that has been exaggerated over the years and then written down.
It's probably Michael Fish that told Noah in the first place, which is why.
You've also got to bear in mind as well as what they consider to be the world. They didn't know about America, Australia, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's going to be a point.
It was literally the world was like 30, 40 miles away from where they lived, or to the mountain range they could see in the distance.
Now, I want to ask all
The
of you.
world as they knew it.
I'm just going to nip out for a sec. So while I'm going, just think, but don't say, what is the biggest obstacle for a literal global flood to you personally? So have a think about that one, and I'll be back in like 2 minutes. Okay? Wee break.
Is this where we put on the commercial?
I have this idea.
This is where we put on the Jeopardy music.
Yeah.
Deal and Wayne and Paul and Dee will probably remember the 1987 news weather forecast. I've got this idea.
Yeah.
Michael Fish standing there and saying, I've just had a phone call from Mrs. Noah, who's been told there's going to be a global flood later, but don't worry, it's only going to be local.
A local flood for local people.
Just in the Arab, just in the Middle East region. There's nothing to worry about.
Oh, dear.
There's no water for you here.
I think because earlier when I was listening to the hangar, I'm not sure which one of you, because I may or may not have been playing a game at the same time, pointed out that, and this is something that's often crossed my mind, is like, why do Christians try and come up with a scientific explanation? Why don't they just say, well, it was a miracle because it's God?
Yeah.
Because of what it says in the Bible, they can't.
Well, because Christians haven't. Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, is a different breed than modern Christianity or fundamentalist Judaism, etc. And they have a need to take back what they think that they've lost in society, and they live in a technological society. And the only way that they can try to reason with people is through the use of scientific terms, because people are now so used to science and technology that they will do anything to try to use that to say, look, this was real, this was true. Whereas
but they fail miserably.
Well, to you and me, yeah, but obviously not to a lot of others. That's a sad commentary on people in general. But I mean, I just think that's definitely part of the reason. They're trying to use a language of modern society for something so ancient and frankly, which was probably never taken seriously.
Well, like the younger creationists too, yeah.
I mean, they break it down into historical and observational science now, don't they? I mean, that's the latest thing.
I mean, look at the Republican Party today.
So I have to.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Just teasing.
No, but look at them today. What's the common denominator, and the common insult in the Republican Party today is somebody's a rhino, a Republican in name only, and their entire philosophy is we have to go all the way back to the basics, because if these basics don't make sense, none of it makes sense. So throw out, socialized welfare. Throw out, we don't want socialized medicine. We want, any sort of gun for anybody who wants it.
No new taxes.
Yeah, no taxes at all.
Right.
So you have this going back. It's like in a sense fundamentalist Muslims who are saying, if our basics don't make sense, and if we don't build on those, none of it makes sense. And that means our entire philosophy is wrong. It's the same with the Republicans. It's the same with the fundamentalist Christians who say, look at all these problems in society. It's because Christianity, has been thrown out of the social sphere, and look what's happened. And the only way to get back to it is to go back to the fundamentals. And if we don't believe every single thing written in it, then none of it is real.
The word clingy comes to mind.
Yeah, but I mean, the amazing thing is that this is what they say. So they give the inherent problem to their beliefs, you know, to the masses. They say, if you can discredit this, then all of what we believe is discredited. That's what they're saying, and that's why they're so tenuous. You know, such a tenuous grip on reality when they're trying to use, you know, science and technology to prove all these things are real. Because, you know, it doesn't jive with reality in any way whatsoever. And I think when you have that sort of cognitive dissonance, some people are just going to say, okay, all this is bullshit. And some people are going to say, no, whatever happens, I'm just going to believe, and that's just the end of it.
Yeah, one bad thing about it is some people take that to mean that a lot of the other Christians are just like that, and they're not. You know, they're misrepresenting a whole lot of other people.
I agree. I have no love for them as in their philosophy anyway, but I recognize that there are some sensible Christians in most aspects of their lives. So, you know, I'd rather not disagree with them on too much as long as I can count them as allies on certain things. But yeah.
Well, like in that earlier hangout, you saw like there was a lot that Nate pretty much agreed with. You know, when we was talking, that was a great hangout, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to him earlier. I just couldn't get in at the same time. But yeah, I mean, he seems like a moderate guy who, you know, sensible in most aspects of his life, or almost all of them, except perhaps his belief in a deity. That's basically what it seems like.
Yeah, well, we'll agree on. I mean, we'll disagree on a lot, but he strikes me as more honest about a lot of things than some of the other ones on here are.
Well, I've never spoken to G-Man, and I think I've seen one of his videos now. So I know I mean, I know Jason Barnes from his videos, and I know a couple of others, but you know, Saiten, and a couple of others, I guess. And they're, you know, obviously not what Nate is.
Yeah. Fiona, you're Roman Catholic, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
see, I mean, look at Fiona. I mean, she's a Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, but you understand science and how it works. So, you know, and see, that makes a big difference too. It doesn't take your faith away from you. It just probably helps you get a better view of the world.
Well, look at what's his name, Ken, the biologist, Ken
Miller. Ken Miller.
Ken Miller, yeah. I mean, you know, he was the star witness in Kitzmiller versus Dover.
Yeah.
He was the guy who took down the fundamentalists, and he's a Catholic.
Yes.
You know?
And that's the thing, because quite often you will hear that you have to accept the creation account, you have to accept the biblical flood to be a Christian. But you only hear that coming from the real hardcore fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with them telling me what I have to believe, because I think everybody's faith is a personal thing, and their relationship with God is up to them and them alone. Nobody has a right to tell me what my relationship with my husband should be like. If they stuck their nose in there, they would get a bloody nose. So why do they think they've got a right to tell me about the relationship I have with God and what I have to believe?
Well, you missed it. You weren't in the room, but I said basically because they are saying that if the basics, the entire roots of their philosophy are wrong, then everything, you know, their entire philosophy is to be discounted.
Yeah. But
so they're the ones setting themselves up to fail.
Yeah, but the problem is, then if they want to believe that, that is fine, but they don't get to tell me what I must believe.
Yeah, but Fiona, that's the very basis of fundamentalism and reconstructionism, is that they want every aspect of people's lives to be controlled by a certain select few men at the top.
Yes, and so I don't think it's really anything to do with the faith itself. Now, right, I asked you all a question before I disappeared for a minute or two.
Oh, okay.
What for you, personally, each one of you, is the the flood killer, so to speak. And I'll go along you, the sort of the way I'm seeing you on the screen. So, Dee, what's the flood killer for you?
It's salt water and fresh water.
That makes good sense. Heavy Hauler, what about you?
There's so much of it that is just so wrong. But I think one of the biggest ones that strikes me is trying to say that the fossil record, the different layers, laid down over millions of years of different life forms in each layer and everything. They're trying to say that all that was laid down at one time, and the way they died, and they all sank kind of in order of how much they weighed or something. Anyway, I mean that kills it right there for me, because we know the fossil record, we understand how it came to be. Layers of rock and stuff laid down over the ages, and different. The basic life forms at the bottom, they get more advanced as you go up higher, and they're trying to say it all went down at one time. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, where's the fossil, the rock layer with trilobites, dinosaurs, mammoths, and men, all in the same layer?
Yeah.
That pretty much does it for me.
Right. Now, next one is Mark. Flood killer for you. Mark, are you there, Mark?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah. What is the flood killer for you?
Oh, well.
What are you up to, Mark?
I was half listening, half reading. I had thought about something just now, but then I've forgotten it. Go on to someone else. Come back to me in a minute.
Okay, next person, Mr. Bababui.
It has to be the diversity of life post-flood, how everything ended up in one part of the planet, and other things ended up in other parts of the planet. That diversity question for me just doesn't completely bogs it down.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now it's Nadia. The main flood killer for you. Pick one.
It's very difficult. I'm gonna have to wildly guess the quantity and altitude of water are just too implausible. I mean, granted, freezes at the surface of Mount Everest or whatever, and where to come from, where to go, etc.
Yeah. Right. Now we're on to Nathaniel. Nathaniel?
Oh, me.
Yes. Flood killer.
It's just fucking idiotic.
He just left it all together.
Yeah, sorry.
The whole thing, caboodle.
Yeah.
Hey, look. I grew up in a secular Jewish household. I can say that when my rabbi told me it's just a story, it's not real. What else can I say?
Yeah. That is a fair point. That is a very fair point. Right. Paul.
Me or Wayne?
Paul.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah, you, not Wayne. I'm going.
I'm following. It's in a different order on my screen. It's a different order on my screen. But no. There's so many damn good reasons to pick, but I think my favorite one has got to be the fact that 18th and 19th century naturalists went out all over the world looking to prove the flood happened and ended up creating modern geology because they didn't find a single piece of evidence for it.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah, definitely. Right, Wayne.
Who was the one between me and Paul?
I don't have one between you.
The lineup is different on each screen.
Just go with Fiona's lineup, people. Stop.
Yeah, just go with
Stop kibitzing her hangout.
For me, it's basically the Egypt problem. The population of Egypt.
Yeah. Hey, Wolf. Flood killer from you. What is the one that for you does it? Mr. Bababoo is winding himself up.
The fact that apparently life is the rules for life is so Yeah, it's the rules of that apply to life are essentially different. Noah is apparently hundreds of years old. 2 pairs of the millions of species can produce a large variety of self-replicating generations, despite the fact that incest would obviously be an obvious thing. So it'd be that also, and 8 human beings producing us. That's with such a variety, it's crazy.
Right. Now, Lee's just joined us. I'm just drawing this to a close. I'm really sorry, Lee. What is the one argument that you would consider to be the flood killer for you?
Noah's age. It's just ridiculous. I mean, how old is he supposed to be when he starts building this? Like 400 or 500 years old? My grandma's nearly 90, she can barely walk. And he's going around building a boat. Where do you get all one from?
Gophers, apparently.
No, he sent somebody to go for wood.
Yeah, go for it. Right.
They must have had to deforest a huge area just to make a boat that size.
Yeah.
Not only the boat, but the scaffolding.
Yeah. In fact, somebody else pointed out that pitch comes from
the Dead Sea.
The ground.
Yeah.
Petroleum.
What makes
fossil fuel?
Bingo.
Global anastic events.
So I'll go last here and just say that for me, the flood killer argument has got to be, where did the water come from and where did it go? Because until you can tell me where the water for the flood came and where it went to after the flood, without invoking a scenario that results in Ark stew, then you haven't even shown me that a flood can happen. You need water for a flood. No matter how you slice it, you don't get a flood without water.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing. You have to find that water.
Fiona, you forgot to go back to Mark.
Sorry, yeah, my one was, well, the comedy bit for me would be, where did they keep all the wood-eating insects on a wooden boat? But apart from that, for me, it's you've got supposedly an all-powerful creator that not long before the flood created everything, and yet he decided to wipe everything out by using a 650-year-old man to build him a boat when he could have slapped his fingers or sent a plague to kill everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think we've all decided that it's very implausible, and I'm going to draw things to a close now because it's now after 11:30. So I'm going to stop the broadcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. This is the first hangout I have ever hosted in my life. I've now popped my cherry.
Well, don't let it be the last. Fiona, before you sign off, can we just say that? Imagine a big logo, a big stamp on the screen. Busted.
Don't you dare. So, if it's been messy in places, that's my fault, I suppose. I just like to let people say their piece, etc. I don't want to keep it too structured. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion.
Very much. Brilliant. It was wonderful. Great time. Thanks.
The viewers have been following. We've been between 20 and 25 most of this evening, which I'm quite pleased about. And I think I should do this type of thing again. I'm considering a possibility of the cosmology of Joshua's long day.
Oh, God.